This here is called a fixed base router, and the reason it's called that is because the body of the router never gets any closer to the base or further away from the base than it is right now. It is fixed into position. Well, now, while that is good for some things, it's not really good for building an inlay. Rather, for building an inlay, we want to have the ability to plunge the router into the material we're working on. So we're going to use a router with a plunge base attachment on it, something similar to this right here. There's several different types of plunge routers available on the market. This is an example of two of them. They both have their pluses and minuses. One of the pluses for this one is it has a larger motor, so it generates more power. It also has a slightly larger base, but because of that, it weighs a little bit more than this one here. This one has a smaller motor and also a smaller base, so it's a little bit more maneuverable. It also has a light in the bottom, so when you turn it on, your workpiece is illuminated. One of the things that they both have in common, however, is a mechanism on here to adjust the depth of plunge that the router will make. It's important that you learn how to adjust the plunge depth on your router, because when you're cutting an inlay out, you cut all the way through the wood material. When you're cutting out a void, you don't cut all the way through, and how you can control that is by adjusting the depth of plunge. So you need to look at your router and learn how to adjust the depth of plunge on your router. If you have your choice between equipping your plunge router with an acrylic base or a solid base, choose the acrylic base. The reason you want the acrylic base is because you can see all the way around the cutting surface with an acrylic base, and the more you can see, the more accurate your cuts are going to be. In addition to the plunge router, there's a few other tools you want to have around when you're working with inlays. Because inlays are made with wood, we need to do sanding. Sorry, I don't like to sand either. Sanding block and sandpaper works fine. Personally, I prefer the random orbital sander, or RO sander. Occasionally, an inlay doesn't fit into the void, so you have to do a little sanding to make it fit. You can use the RO sander, or you can use sandpaper, or you can use a rotary grinding device such as a Dremel. I have two different sizes of drums for my sanding when I'm using the Dremel. Double-sided tape does not tear very well, so you're going to want to use a pair of scissors or a knife to cut the tape with. Occasionally there's going to be a little knob in the bottom of a void that you have to smooth out. A chisel comes in handy for that. To remove the template from the workpiece, a paint scraper or putty knife is used. Because nothing is allowed to move during the routing process, I use quick release clamps to hold my workpiece to my workbench. And I also like to use a soft mallet to tap my inlay into the void when I'm gluing things up. There's one other thing that you're probably going to want, and that is something like an air compressor or a shop vac. We are using tape after all, and if there's a lot of dust around when you apply the tape will stick to the dust and not what you want it to stick to, so you got to do some sort of dust management.